Nickel Corporation in Brooks Point in Palawan. You have Mark Ventures Minerals Development Corporation in Surigao del Sur, in Caraga. So there are a lot, and I think the mine audit done by DNR in 2016 to 2017, that was the justification for the closure and suspension orders against 28 operating mines at that time.
Okay. Given this track record that you mentioned, where do you attribute those impacts, those effects that you cited? Is it more about the failure of regulation, basically failure by the government to regulate the industry, or there was something really inherent with open pit mining methods that would render perhaps even strict government regulation not as effective?
Yeah, well, I would attribute it to three things. First, there are evidence that the mining companies themselves failed to comply with their own obligations stated in their contracts. Constructing adequate tailings dam facilities. I think that's the most violations that were recorded. So on the part of mining companies themselves, it's their obligations that they failed to actually perform. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many accidents. Second, still within the obligations of the company, I think the mining industry has failed to secure the acceptability from communities because they have not convinced either the communities themselves or the local governments that the long-term benefits of these mining projects will redound or will benefit the communities themselves. And so you have very low acceptability from them. And that's why you will have more resistance against these large-scale mining projects. On the other hand, we do find the DNR themselves, they have inadequate people. They do not have the funds. They do not have enough expertise. And certainly, I don't think they have the political will to really enforce all our environmental laws and effectively regulate the mining industry. I don't believe that the DNR, especially the MGB, has the political will to really make sure that the mining industry toe the line and practice rational mining.
Didn't we see this political will during the term of then Environment Secretary Gina Lopez?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, we didn't realize we could actually implement our environmental laws. And so our conclusion then was, so it just takes political will. Somebody who doesn't even have that high expertise of environmental laws, but who could recognize what was the value of the environment and natural resources to the actual benefit of the people. It was easier for Gina Lopez to make those hard political decisions because she saw the numbers and she saw the figures and she saw, no, mining is not going to benefit us. And statistics prove her right. So yes, political will does make a difference. And as I said earlier, I don't think this Secretary Simatu, and especially people in the Mines and Geosciences Bureau, aside from not having adequate funds, people, and expertise, they do not have the political will to enforce effective regulatory mechanisms in the mining industry.
Let's also give an idea of how big open pit mining operations are in the Philippines, despite the 4-year-old ban, which has been lifted by the government.
Sure. Our latest data is that as of 2020, we're using MGB data from 2020. There are about 728 live mining contracts all over the Philippines. Now, we started Alyansa Tigil Mina in 2005. Between 2005 and before the pandemic started, up to 2019, that number of mining contracts was between 450 to 550. So we couldn't believe the database we were reading around June of this year. How could we have more mining projects, approved mining contracts in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic? Never in our history have we had that high number of approved mining contracts and live mining contracts at 721. And then we have, of those 721, granted, not all of them are operating. Some of them are in exploration stage. Some of them are still on construction stage. But out of the 720, 51 are operating. You have excavation, you have digging, you have processing in 51 large-scale mining projects across the country. Again, never in our history have we had that so much number of operating mines. Pre-pandemic, I think the highest was between 45, 46. So it's really hard to understand. How could we have the highest number of operating mining projects in the middle of a pandemic?
But was that also largely affected by the decision by the government to lift the moratorium on new agreements?
Yeah, but the lifting of the moratorium happened this year. It was April. So I think there was really, this is also part of our frustration. DNR failed to disclose many of these applications to the LGUs and to the mining affected communities. And again, I go back to the classic case of the DPO mines in Nueva Vizcaya. And that's very important because it's titled FTAA number 1, Financial Technical Assistance Agreement number 1. That project was supposed by people, by the church, even by the local governments in Nueva Vizcaya. I still distinctly remember in October 2019, before the pandemic, right in front of Secretary Simatu, we asked the MGB, is there a live application for the renewal of these DDPO mines? And MGB said, no, we are not aware. Because we had the local governments with us handing over a petition opposing the renewal of the DDPO mines. And yet this year, June of 2021, the renewal for 25 years of the DDPO mines was signed and issued. So somebody was lying to us 2 years ago. And in the past 2 years, even Governor Padilla from Nueva Vizcaya had difficulty in accessing all the application papers. So we're saying this is abnormal. This is not normal for the DNR and the MGB to be aggressively promoting mining at the height of a pandemic.
But others are also arguing that there's such a thing as responsible mining. What do you think about that?
Well, we used to call responsible mining as a myth. And then Gen Z and the millennials told me, oh, you mean fake news. So yes, responsible mining is fake news to us. There is no such thing as responsible mining, mainly because of 3 things. Number one, there's no legal definition of what responsible mining is. The only definition we have is on Section 2 of the Philippine Mining, and it's rational mining. It's not even responsible mining. With the lack of a legal definition, we do not have parameters to measure the performance of mining companies, nor can we hold DNR accountable because there is no parameter, there is no measurement on how can we say a mining company is being responsible, or how can we say that DNR is implementing responsible mining, because there's no legal definition. However, on the third point, we don't believe that best practice and minimum standards on international standards is good enough. There has to be more ambitious, there has to be more robust ways for us to promote and measure and hold government and mining companies accountable if they're actually doing responsible mining. I think that's the minimum we can do in the time of climate change.
There's no type of method of mining that would be deemed acceptable for you.
Oh, there is. As long as, for example, the mining project, one, it should follow all environmental law. So, for example, it will not, we will not oppose a mining project if the local governments and the indigenous peoples accept it, because from their analysis and from their view, it's gonna be beneficial to them. We are not gonna oppose any mining project if it follows and complies with all environmental laws. But it's easy for us to oppose a mining project just on two justifications. One, they failed to secure the social acceptability of either the local government or the indigenous people. And it's quite clear why they refused to give acceptability, because the mining company failed to convince them that they will benefit from them. And number two, I have told this even to the Chamber of Mines. You make the job of environmentalist very easy because you do not comply with environmental laws and your contractual obligations.
Okay. It's also cited certain cases. What happens after in an open pit mine ceases operation? Basically, how is that decommissioned?
Well, they have a 5-year decommissioning and exit plan, rehabilitation and decommissioning plan. In fact, that plan is supposed to be approved even before they start day one of digging the mine tenement. Problem is, most of these decommissioning and rehabilitation plans are blueprints and not necessarily obligated up to a few years before the closure. So technically, all mining projects have to implement their rehabilitation or decommissioning plans on the even a few years before their contract actually ends. Now, will the mining company still be obligated, for care and maintenance of that mine site after the decommissioning plant? The sad answer is no. And I think this is one of the reasons why former DNR Secretary Gina Lopez wanted the ban on open pit mine. Once the final mine rehabilitation and decommissioning plan ends on a specific time, it's now the government's responsibility and obligation to care and maintain for that mine. In any case, Christian, I know of only 2 mining projects that have entered rehabilitation and decommissioning phase under the Philippine Mining Act. One is Rapu-Rapu. The other is TVI in Zamboanga, Sibugay. Unfortunately, both cases are bad examples of how a mine closes because they have failed to rehabilitate and decommission appropriately.
That is the point that I'd like to clarify with you. Is it really a problem with enforcement and regulation, or that the method itself is the problem? That even if you impose a lot of safeguards and strictly enforce them, there's no way that you can properly rehabilitate an open pit mine that has been decommissioned. Because, for instance, in the latest administrative order by Secretary Simatu, that is his argument, right? Sabi niya, major issues concerning mining, including open pit mining, cannot be attributed to the use of the method itself.
Yeah, but we should be careful in reading that. The opposition against open pit mining is not only on the accident and the mine spills and the disasters that come when something happens to the mine site or the tailings dam or the acid mine drainage. Many of the opposition against the open pit is a destruction of the forest. That you cannot bring back. Many of the opposition against the mining project is how the access to potable water has been reduced because the processing plant of the mining project needs and demands a huge number of water, volume of water. Those impacts are not solely because you have mitigation plans or because you have good technical solutions in your plan. Those are impacts of the mining project because of the nature of the mining. You're going to cut trees. You're going to level the mountains. You're going to dig an open pit. That is a permanent disturbance of the landscape. And once a forest, a primary or secondary forest is permanently disturbed, it has repercussions on irrigation, on landslides, on erosion, on disaster risk, even on the culture and politics of life of people around that area. Those are the things that cannot be solved by technical elements.
Meron bang naging kahit papaano glimmer of hope or silver lining? Because I suppose if you do that, but there has to be something that you would have to offer after decommissioning. Let's say reforestation, for instance. Meron ba nag-work kahit papaano?
I think there are efforts, and I will not begrudge this to the mining industry. I think some, in fact, even many of them are really conscious about their impacts right now. Are they doing reforestation? I know some of them are. Are they improving their standards on monitoring and engineering standards? I accept that. I think so. But at the end of the day, we are seeing best practices from different stages of mining in different areas. I do not think that the whole mining industry itself is ready nor willing to go beyond responsible mining and actually do costing of their impact, so that at the end of the day, it cannot be the communities who will just shoulder the impacts of this large-scale mining. And Christian, even in times of disasters, we have always said this: we should welcome all assistance and help from any corporations or anybody, but corporations must not use the reforestation, the rehabilitation, or their corporate social responsibility as a means to convince the affected communities to accept something that is not acceptable to them in the first place.
You have to understand the basic cost-benefit analysis of open pit mining, which leads me to the next question.
But Christian, before I answer, the problem with the cost benefit of the mining industry is they compute the cost of doing mining. They do not compute the cost of environment, social, health costs. And then when they compute the benefit, how much profit do they have? But of course, they don't count the tax havens and the tax breaks.
That's the context of my next question. Yung cost-benefit analysis, which is not exclusively limited to the company operations, but including the impact on the environment. Let's talk about social acceptability. Why is it very important to make sure that the operations are accepted, miski hindi naman embraced, diba, by the community, and that they properly understand the cost it could have on the local environment, for instance, on the community. Kasi nakalagay dito sa latest administrative order, part of the safeguards that were spelled out, nakalagay, the company should conduct comprehensive stakeholders involvement. Maganda siyang pakinggan, di ba? Who would argue with that? But in reality, how have mining companies, let's say, ignored or followed this particular safeguard?
Well, I can cite an example, and this is a trend. Whether we go to the DPO in Nueva Vizcaya, in Aroroy in Masbate, or in Ipila, or in Brooks Point in Palawan, even as far as South Cotabato with the Tampakan mines, social acceptability is important because you're going to affect the everyday lives of people in that area. Second, your effect or the impact of mining in that area is going to be permanent. The mining industry will always say this: mining is not a permanent land use that they can go back to forest or they can rehabilitate it. That is only a half truth. Once they cut the forest and the rivers are redirected, they cannot bring back the biodiversity, nor can they bring back the benefits that the original landscape was providing as ecological services to the communities, whether directly in the impact area or downstream. So when a local government does oppose a mining project and in effect does not give its social acceptability, we can assume that the local government did its assignment, that they have studied the environmental impact assessment, that they have studied the taxation estimates, and that they have studied all the other proposals of the mining company that will benefit the local government. And the conclusion must have been, no, talo kami rito. Or no, we don't see this as part of our long-term direction. That is why social acceptability is important, because if both the communities and the local governments do not accept the mining project, then you have the local government and the communities who will actively oppose them. And at the end of the day, it's only the mining company who will benefit. And then you will see the local government suffer because the mining company will not have any participation or engagement from them.
In practice, so paano ginagawa yun? How do local governments usually, in practice, do that assessment and provide decisions as to whether a proposed mining operation is acceptable to the local community?
Sure. Both in the DPO and Nueva Vizcaya, the provincial governments asked us several things. Number one, they asked us expert opinions on the environmental impact analysis. Halos sabay yan, kasi halos sabay ang dalawang FTA na yan. They specifically asked, can environmental experts do a critique, i-review yung environmental impact assessment ng mining company? Now, specific naman to Tampakan, the provincial government was very specific. They asked for a hydrology study. Ano yung impact ng Tampakan mine sa water ng South Cotabato? Because South Cotabato is primarily an agricultural area with all the pineapple and all the rice fields there. And true enough, the mining company wasn't able to produce, but we did have some secondary data that told us and told the local government the available water supply in the 6 watersheds around South Cotabato is not enough for the demand of Tampakan mines. Now in the DPO, nung patapos na yung mining contract about 3 or 4 years ago, that was when a hydrology study was demanded or requested to us by the local government. Dahil nakita na nila more than 12 community water systems dried up between 2014 and 2015 when the DPO mines became fully operational. So that's one. Second na hinihingi ng maraming local governments and even indigenous peoples, money matters. Can we compute actually how much is the mining company going to pay the local government in terms of taxes at saka yung maraming promises? And in the case of indigenous peoples, some indigenous peoples are asking environmental groups, how much are we expecting and how much should we ask for the royalty payment? So I mean, those are just 2 examples, or 3 not, no? A critique of the environmental impact assessment, hydrology study, which is very important talo na ngayon. And then third, money matters. How much taxes are actually, is it truthful? At saka paano? Because many local governments didn't realize kung walang head office yung mining company sa LGU mo, hindi yan sa'yo magbabayad ng tax. Sa Makati or sa Pasig magbabayad ng tax ang mining company. And some LGUs learned that a little bit too late.
Okay. Mr. Jaybee Garganera, thank you very much for joining us tonight on the program.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you for all your viewers. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas to you, JB. Thank you. We're taking a short break. After the fact, we'll be right back.